and I will just quickly introduce this. It seemed to me when I became Mayor that there wasn't a structure in place that automatically switched on in a post-event environment in order to conduct a review of what had occurred. And regardless of the success or perception of otherwise, it's really important that we do that after every single event. And we have had our fair share of events but that we've had to review, and I actually believe that we're getting better at putting in place the mechanisms for reviewing events after they occur. And one of the things that we've done is to ensure that when the review is done, that we actually speak to a broad range of people that have had some involvement in managing or responding to the event, and then bringing together the recommendations about what we might do to improve in the future. But more importantly, to embed that into both action plans or into standard practice for the future. And I honestly believe that this is something that we have failed to do nationally in response to major events, and I'm thinking of the Canterbury earthquake sequence as the glaring example of where individual organisations have reviewed events from their perspective, but there still hasn't been the sort of synergistic, what's the right word? But the bringing together of all of those in order to develop a lessons learned that then gets built into the national framework and into the local frameworks throughout the country. So there are some incredibly positive things that we learnt from the Canterbury earthquake sequence, and we've seen some of them implemented in Kaikoura. So obviously the fund that was made available to businesses so that they could continue to pay staff at a time when there was a high degree of uncertainty. You know, that's like gold. After the Canterbury earthquakes, the government also set up a fund which enabled exporters to go overseas and actually reassure quite troubled and worried markets. And that degree of reassurance that some of our exporters could give directly by fronting up and talking through the challenges that they were facing, but also the advantages that they could bring to the supply chain, and with just-in-time supply chains, it was hugely challenging for a lot of exporters. It was gold. It was a magic thing for the government to do. But there are other things that were done that I would regard as not best practice and something that do need to be investigated. And I guess that in an election year, it's not a good year to be looking at what you got wrong. And so, as soon as this is out of the way, it's something that I think we really do need to focus on, because you learn, I personally think, more from your mistakes than you do from your successes. And you really don't want to see them repeated elsewhere. I look at what happened in Wellington with this particular earthquake that sparked off this review, and I remember reading in the paper a headline that said that the most earthquake-prone street had dodged a bullet, and I really fear that there is a belief that if you dodge a bullet, you're bulletproof, and you're not. So I can see some of the concerns that were evident after the September earthquake leading to some of the, or contributing to some of the events after the February earthquake. We really do need to learn those lessons and make sure that they're embedded not just in Christchurch but across the nation. So I'm really appreciative of this report. I'm very happy to to move it, and Phil will second it. And now I'll hand over to Mary to speak to the report generally.
Thank you very much. I've also got Tsunami here, who's from our community development, our civil defence and emergency management team, and who's been holding the pen on the implementation plan. Just to pick up on what the Mayor said, is that we do now have a very structured and formal process about reviewing events. So after every event within 3 months, we are aiming to do a review and a corrective action report, and make sure that what we learn from that is implemented and flowed on to future events and also the activities in between. For our larger events such as this, we, as you know, we did a full external review and developed this implementation plan, so that we can ensure that we build community preparedness and resilience before events, but also learn from what's happened in other events for our response. You will have seen, hopefully, the lessons that were learnt from this event and the fire event by what we did in the flooding event, which was in many respects totally different in terms of how we really improved that communication, both to affected parties and people, and more generally the way the EOC was managed and operated, and also how we actually had people out on the ground at all times, particularly in those first few days, so residents had somebody to see and connect with, and also how we ensured our contractors, response teams and everybody that interacted had the same messages to give to people. So those were things that have hopefully improved since then. But today we're actually talking about this implementation plan. We had a message that you wanted a structure from your pre-brief this morning. You wanted a structural diagram. We weren't 100% sure what you meant by that, but we'll put that up on the board, which just outlines walking through from that we had the event. We then undertook a review, which was a review that was done externally of the CDM team, and then the CDM team have worked with others to develop this implementation plan. And it's probably appropriate that I hand over to Tsunami, who's actually done all the hard work on this, to walk through the key elements and things that are happening from that implementation plan.
Thank you and good morning. So if I was to take you through from the left side, which is the sirens, what we're really looking to do here is review how we're going to use sirens in an event and combine it with the key public messages and resources that we have. So for example, how we can use the sirens in relation to the evacuation zones, but also look at other communication ways. So looking at voice capability for sirens is particularly an option, and we're going through the process of reviewing that and what's the best option for the communities that's there. Building on that is the evacuation plan. Three-pronged that is looking at how we can update the technical side on tsunami evacuation zones, but also the maps and the modelling that has gone into it. So it's a really good time to review those technical details and align it with our national standards, but also relaying that to the community side, how we can work with communities to get the best information out in the way that they see fit, and how we can work with the communities to get the messages out in their neck of the woods. And one of the things that we're working at the moment is looking at specifically tsunami evacuation planning. So working with communities and community boards and our community development advisors to prepare the community on some of the specific actions that we can take to help and enable the community to look after themselves better. And building on that is a community response resilience plans that encompasses other hazards as well as tsunamis. Which builds on to our operational side, which is the Emergency Operations Centre. As Mary said before, following the July event, we've incorporated a lot of the recommendations that has come out from our operations point of view, for example, having the staff training, having people on the ground, consistent public messaging, so everyone got the same message, and then that is reflected in our changing policy. In civil defence centres, so we're looking at taking a stock take of what we need in the civil defence centres, identifying what are the other buildings and services that we can use as civil defence centres, and encompassing that with volunteer training. So who are the volunteers that can be at the civil defence training, and how we can upskill them and give them that opportunity. And lastly, it's the communication, which is about registration. So if you've got evacuees, how we can register them as we've done in the July floods, and give them that opportunity. And also the public messages, it just keeps coming back to it, how we can get communication methods out in more than one ways, so the public feels informed, they're getting the up-to-date information, and they are feeling reassured. And we've also aligned this with McDem national messaging, so everything feeds upwards and they're all streamlined with us.
So we haven't gone through, if that's okay, point by, because the implementation plan's quite long, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at it, and we'll be implementing those and reporting back on, giving a sort of update about the implementation.
Which we've asked for, the committee asked for that to be earlier, rather than waiting till next year, which some of these have, you know, June 2018 for delivery. But I thought we'd requested a report back on progress. Oh yeah, no, sorry. I was looking at ours. We recommended a report back on progress by the end of 2017, and we've requested a further report on tsunami siren options and include information on tsunami risks, because I mean I still think that was you know, that's an area where we need to get right. I mean, if we're going to have tsunami sirens, then they got to be voice command, because if you don't tell people why they're hearing a siren, then it can be meaningless. You can educate as much as you like, but if people are in a state of panic, and we have to get people to rely on the long, strong, get gone, so people don't have to wait. But what we don't want is 20,000 people jumping in a car at the same time. So the local evacuation plans have to be local, and they have to be owned by the community and well understood. And that means that where people have to go to has to be well understood as well. And that's my inevitable frustration with McDem, who says long, strong, get gone as far as you possibly can. Oh, well, I'm sorry, but I think we've got to change the message to as far as necessary, and people need to understand what that means in each locality, because they will mean different things if you're up a hill, they'll mean different things if you're you know, outside the area of risk. And I think there needs to be much better understanding about what the risks are in terms of local, regional and nationally generated, you know, the other side of the world generated tsunami, what the risks are and what the time frames are in terms of response. Because you know, I guess that, I mean, nobody wants to leave the shelter of their home and then sit on the bridge that is much more exposed than their house ever was, because they're stuck in traffic, and the neighbour who has no way of hearing the tsunami siren because they're, you know, sort of partially deaf, and has no idea that this is going on, and nobody's knocked on a door or rung her doorbell, flashed her lights or whatever to get her out of bed. You know, it's just, you know, so there's so much that needs to be done at the local level to make this meaningful. And the other thing is that we've focused here on civil defence centres, but there are some areas that won't have civil defence centres because they've got something that's way better and way more community embedded, you know, like the Littleton project and places like that. So they can, you know, civil defence centres or appropriate local facilities or things. So, David, you've got your hand up. Phil Yarney.
Thank you. Look, endorse everything that the Mayor has just said, and one of the big issues, and I live in that sort of tsunami affected area, was a lot of people, as you say, got in their cars and disappeared to Darfield or further, and so in the evolving development of this plan, I think I have seen some preliminary mapping, but it would be very helpful to say if you live in this area here, it is advisable, you know, the long, strong, get gone. You need to move beyond or into this area here.
Or go to Maidaho High School, or go to Linwood, or go to,
the sheer geography of our coastline and the limited access, egress points, it would have been quicker to walk out.
Some people should have.
Than it was to sit in.
Some people should have.
Should have, yeah. And it just created endless traffic jams, and a lot of people that probably didn't need to move did, and created all sorts of pandemonium for the rest. The other area I think is actually the use of the sirens themselves, and I do support Leanne's analysis there too, that they were put in primarily for the long distance earthquake event, and really when they were turned on in this event, if we had a tsunami from Kaikoura, it would have been and gone by the time the sirens were even turned on. So we need to look at that sort of methodology, as well as looking at the the local event as opposed to the long-term event, and when we use the sirens. And thirdly, at a local level, we had an annual meeting for one of the residents group, the North Shore Residents Group, recently, within the last couple of months, and there was a presentation given by a staff member from ECAN. Name escapes me at the moment, but it was probably the best tsunami presentation that I have seen, which clearly sort of gave people that close event scenario right through to the Chilean scenario, and I think I'd like to find out what her name was, but it was certainly a presentation that needs to be wider delivered, and the understandings of that delivery, I'd say, would go a long way to reinforcing what you are trying to develop here. So I'd like to commend what you've done so far, but you know, there are some areas I think that we could really firm up and make this a good example of how we would react in terms of tsunamis of varying location origin. So yeah, great work so far, and I'd just like to see some of those other things incorporated.
So thank you for that. And just in response, the evacuation planning is going to include the when, where to go to, and how to get there, and working in with the police about transport planning to how best to effectively move people out. The siren report will come back on those issues you raised about the sirens and the pros and cons of using them for different events. And the team is working quite closely with Marion from ECAN, and sometimes doing joint where she presents stuff and we work. So we agree with you. Excellent presentation. Yeah, it's great. Yep.
Well, it might be a good idea to get that presentation in front of the council in a live streaming session, but also to actually do a video of it and get it online, because those sorts of presentations are like gold, and if people can just, you know, watch it when it suits them and absorb it. But I mean, keep using it for public meetings. It's great. It's great for communities. Phil Bignani.
Thanks for all this, Mary. And David has referred to, you know, like a community meeting where people are really involved with some good information. And I just really want to ask you, and the whole theme of working with communities, So in terms of the preparedness plans, and just how we get there in terms of, and I guess it's, and there's clear reference to involvement of community boards, and I'm just presuming though, and there is the potential here for a whole community development project, so that in fact this whole area of preparedness is really targeted by us as a council. So in fact, yeah, I guess we have all of our community engagement and community development people on board with our communities regarding this.
So there are only 3 people in the community resilience team and civil defence, but they are working quite closely and have actually met with the community development advisors and community governance advisors, so that actually it can be a joint team response that can work on this, but also in different areas there'll be different issues. So a holistic response to the community. Do you want to add?
Yes, and building on that is really working with the other community groups as well. So everybody coming to the table and understanding what that risk is, and using the resources that we already have in a community to look after ourselves, and getting that shared perspective, I think is really important. So we are definitely planning to bring other community groups, community boards, as well as community development advisors.
So in that way, there'll be
Yep, sorry, Yanni.
Cool. Thank you. Just wondered where the funding's coming from to do this, and if there's any funding available for those community groups to be involved in developing community resilience plans.
Yes.
So there is, as I said, some resources within the community development team in terms of there's community resilience workers there to work with communities, and some of the community development advisors will also be doing that. But there are also resources available that will support some of the initiatives that have come out from local communities with their community resilience plans, and we're looking at other ways to get more resources for that. So as a community, and we know having Aranui have already done one, and Belfast already doing one, and other communities doing some, they often come up with initiatives that they want to run themselves, and resources such as booklets or posters. So there's some limited resources for that, and we're looking at other ways that we can get more resourcing.
The community resilience fund, is that something, like there's a problem for Apple, is we've got a huge area affected, and we're having to fund community resilience projects because there's no central funding for it, but it seems
I think this started before this project, so are you able to give some relief to the community boards that are funding some of these resilience plans?
Yes, we'll discuss with your community governance managers about what community resilience projects you're having brought into the community boards, and look at whether we can pull those together into one package or one stream of funding into the community resilience area. So we'll talk to your teams and find out what's coming in and how we can pull those together. But we weren't aware that you were being asked at a community board level for funding for community resilience plans. So we'll follow up.
You might get some money back for your community board, so stop digging.
Yeah, so we'll do some work and develop a response for that.
You know the Mount Pleasant project? I think they've met with you on a number of occasions.
My understanding was that they were getting funding from Red Cross. That's the advice I got just a couple of days ago, so they weren't asking council for money.
And I think you'll find that there was a resolution from the funding report into them to see if there was money attached to the tsunami response funding for that thing. So you'll look at it. That's great.
We'll follow up on that. Yeah.
I guess there's some communities that are very well organised, and there's areas that are at risk that don't have the same community infrastructure in terms of residence groups or some of the they're in a different, they've got different strengths. So what I don't see in here is a kind of plan to target those areas that haven't been as well organised or connected. Is there anything that you're considering around the areas that may be more vulnerable because they don't have active residence groups or neighbourhood support? Or
So this report is purely the implementation of the recommendations from the review. So that wasn't identified in the review as an action, so this hasn't addressed it. But broader and outside of this implementation review is the team is looking at areas, and also that's something that our community development staff are looking at, and it's also something the community response fund is looking at, about actually developing and supporting those local communities to activate the communities and connect them so they can respond and do things such as community resilience plans and other responses.
And this is the final question. I think you mentioned it, but I couldn't find it in the report. But are we doing, I drove past a school the other day that had an old sign that said, you know, faded yellow CD sector post. Are we doing any work around the whole, where are the civil defence sector posts, where are the kind of community information hubs? Because I know we had a project, and I thought in terms of lessons learned post-earthquake, there was a collaborative group of information community groups that gave us a lot of feedback about what worked well and what could be improved, but I didn't see any discrete action around reviewing those sectors or posts, or those, like the other one I'd say is the welfare centre.
Yeah, but this isn't arising, your question doesn't arise from the tsunami event
well, it does,
report.
It's where people went in the tsunami.
No, because it doesn't arise from that, because at that stage, when we asked people to evacuate, we hadn't called a state of civil emergency. So it's not, it doesn't come to play. There's a whole lot of combined issues here, but it's a lesson learned from the Canterbury earthquake sequence, which is that the sector post sign outside the school hall means nothing.
Yeah.
So, and it might be actually a good idea to just take them down unless they are genuinely civil defence sector posts. But can you respond to that?
So we are, let's Tsunami, because we are doing a stock take of that.
And the welfare centre was fed into the review, this review.
Yeah, sure, if I may. So we're doing two things. So looking at taking down the sector post signs, because under the new review it is no longer, so it's all been disestablished. In place of that is the community hubs and the civil defence centres, and we're doing two things there: identifying what are the other civil defence centres that we could potentially use, but also looking at community hubs where communities can actually naturally gather for that cup of tea, to be with other people, and working with those communities to find those facilities.
But also connect back to whatever the coordination function is, because I think the real gap in both September and February was that there was no way that the community could connect unless they were a sort of a recognised civil defence group within the structure set out by legislation rather than set up by the community. Yeah. Good. All right, well, it's been moved and seconded. Is that right? Yes, it has. Mayor and Councillor Clearwater. I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. And thank you both very, very much.